Our next speaker is Jason Fox, who is the content design lead at Chime in San Francisco. Jason has led content design work at companies like Atlassian, Oracle, and Verizon. And at Chime, he uses language to help people achieve financial peace of mind. Today, Jason's going to share some insights to help us craft, revise, and optimize content and content processes for product adoption and usage. Super excited about this. Fun fact, Jason was a goth in high school and spelled his name Jason with an I. I think we all went through those transformative phases in high school. So, hey, let's give a warm virtual welcome to Jason.
Hey, everybody. Yep, you all know my history as a goth, Jasin. Super glad that I am able to share that with you and with everyone, really. It's a nice way to break the ice with people. So I'm really honored and happy to be here. Thank you all for meeting with me just before this lunch break. Let me share a bit of my screen with you, and we'll get off to it. Great. So we're talking about UX writing for behavioral design, and I will just take a brief moment before I start talking to say that I am fortunate enough to have a newborn in the house with me, and I can hear him crying just over there with his mom, and it's like breaking my heart. So if you hear or see me looking over there longingly, that's why. I'm not like watching TV in that direction. It's just my heart going out to him. So yeah, UX writing for behavioral design. I think that as I've been working on this presentation for you all, and as I've been doing the work of UX writing for behavioral design, it's kind of started to evolve. And I was thinking, let's see if I can change this slide, that instead of UX writing, it's really more just behavioral content design. I think that's a more appropriate term. So officially changing the presentation title to behavioral content design. I hope that's okay with everybody. Jason. So hi, I'm Jason Fox, and I'm a content designer at Chime. I'm legally obligated to tell you that Chime is not a bank. I'm not actually legally obligated to tell you that. I just feel like I always have to say that because compliance is such a part of my life. But you can also call me Jace or Jason. And I say that because like over this time of working remotely, my look has changed quite a bit. Like I used to look like this, and if I've met with any of you remotely, which I have. I think I've met with several of you in the audience today. You've probably seen me looking like this or like that or like that. I have many faces and many names. And since I can't put like a picture of all of you in this slide, I thought maybe I would just put like this Curious George mask to represent all of you. So we're all here together. Okay, first of all, what is content design? And this is like a slide I wasn't sure if I would include. I think a year ago it would have been no-brainer, but I think we all have a much more nuanced understanding of content design these days. But for the sake of doing it, let's just say that content design is a way of thinking. Thank you to Sarah Winters for that definition. But more specifically, it's the practice of using data to give people information, and it's information that they need, and they get it in a way that they expect. And for me, it's all about applying language to an interface in a way that contributes to an intuitive and meaningful experience. And in this example here, we see like a broad swath of content design. We see main navigation, we see some nav expanded areas, we see a sidebar menu, we see that quick start onboarding experience. And here's a quick thought exercise. Just imagine this interface without content design. It would look kind of like this. Kind of. This is a bit of hyperbole, but you get the idea. All right, I've made my point. Moving on. So for me, when it comes to behavioral content design, I would say it's like the practice of writing content to influence behavior or behavioral decisions, which like the distinction there is kind of hard to say, but really it means ensuring that language we apply to our product experiences is not only intuitive and meaningful, but that it also drives product adoption and usage. And I just want to reinforce that this type of content design really can be done by anyone. I think like the behavioral content designer is not necessarily a distinct role, but it's like a mindset a lot. So you are all behavioral content designers at various stages, and you'll see what I mean. So when you think of behavioral content design, think of moments like onboarding or product upsells, or times when we're trying to help people build some type of core habit within a product. Cool. Moving forward, now that I've deemed all of us behavioral content designers, let's do some content designing. And congratulations, you work for the state of Utah now. It's a beautiful state. So exciting. You're on a team, and it's responsible for getting more tourists to the state this summer. And it's your job as a behavioral content designer or someone in that mindset to improve engagement with this particular screen or this little modal window. Looking more closely at it, you can change anything you want about it. You can change words, remove words, revise words, whatever you think will increase engagement, which in this case is like clicking the button or clicking a date picker. So think about it for a minute, chew on this, maybe take a screenshot so you can look at it as I speak. We'll come back to this at the end of the presentation and sort of flesh out some hypotheses based on what we talk about in the presentation today. So look at it, soak it in, screenshot it if you want, ignore it, I don't know. Let's move right along into this thing that I like to call the Glengarry Bob Ross effect. And what we have here is a in-product upsell push notification that has unintentionally threatened the user. You're low on ink, never run low on ink again. And I call this the Glengarry Bob Ross effect. Let me explain that to you. You've probably never heard this term because it doesn't exist. It's not a real term. Yes, Glengarry Bob Ross effect. It starts like this. You are Bob Ross and beauty is everywhere. You're immersed in the creative process. You're helping people become better users of your product. And then inevitably, the business and its neediness kind of creeps in and it whispers to you, wouldn't it be a beautiful moment to close a sale or to pump up some metrics or, you know, just to always be closing. And this is what I call the Glengarry Bob Ross effect. I see it everywhere. And I think when it comes to behavioral content design, you know, we go from this moment where we can let someone know that they're running low on ink and they might need to replace it to telling them that they're low on ink, that they should buy more ink and that they should buy more printer ink forever or else. And that's problematic, not only because like my speaker note for this slide just says, fuck yeah. So there you go. It's a problem because, you know, when we don't have a nice bit of intention behind our content, I think the impact will often be negative. And we'll often see content like this end up in social media where it's getting really scrutinized. And we don't want that. It's really bad. It's not a nice feeling to have your stuff out in public getting scrutinized like this. I'm sorry if I'm putting someone at HP on blast with this, but it was already all over the internet. So it's, you know, whatever. I work at a bank at Chime. So I spent some time brainstorming ways that a banking app might unintentionally threaten a member with notification messages. And I have a point to doing this. So your credit score went down. Spend more or it'll keep going down. That's pretty scary, telling someone that like one of the ways to increase their credit score is to keep spending for these spending habits that can contribute to an increase in your credit score. But, you know, I can see each of these messages going out into the world potentially, like because maybe your team is targeting some type of very ambitious initiative or metric, and a little piece of copy gets out the door that you just didn't understand had this really negative emotional charge. So I'm always keenly aware of moments like this. And for like beyond getting scrutinized on social media, when you create a bad upsell moment, these things are just really charged, like I said, with negative emotion, and that can have a profound impact on how people feel about your product. So as a content designer, I try to collaborate and share as early and often as I can to help avoid these types of dark content timelines. So there's a behavioral framework that I found fits really well into behavioral content design, and it's the FOG behavior model. I'm sure lots of you are familiar with this behavior model, probably some fans, some not fans. FOG, also known as BJ, is a man. He's a person who has put this framework together, and I'll just say that a lot of people have some really well-founded criticism about some of his work and his impact on the field of design. And my summary is that some folks are concerned that some of his approaches to behavioral design can encourage an irresponsible relationship with technology. And I would just say, you know, do your own research. try to make ethical behavioral design decisions. And I have found that for content design, a lot of the work that BJ has done can help to really impact in a positive way the way that people build habits with products and move through experiences with ease and learn. So this model gives us a foundation for behavioral content design, and it helps us create a kind of confluence of motivation and ability so that when we prompt someone, they'll be more likely to exhibit a particular target behavior. That behavior could be something small, like inviting a teammate to collaborate on a Confluence document, or it could be a larger change in behavior, like building a habit, maybe connecting all the apps and integrations that a team uses into Jira so that it becomes a more relied upon tool in day-to-day use. So motivation is the willpower to take action, ability is the capacity to take action, and the prompt is the push to make it happen. So can you tease out some of the BMAP in this Jira software screen, which I worked to design when I was on the growth team there? It's kind of layered. There's lots of different BMAP in there. There's the motivation of it being trusted by 65,000 teams. There's the ability of being able to continue with Google or with just your email. There's also the prompt to continue with Google and sign up with email. There's some motivation around it being free for up to 10 users. So those are the types of considerations I have when looking, within a single screen at some of the content. But we can go back to a more basic example of behavioral content design that you probably already take part in. Like, consider how you would use language in an email to convince someone to try out Confluence. I keep using Confluence and Jira as examples because I used to work at Atlassian, so you'll see a lot of that in this presentation. But you would provide clear motivation, you would indicate their ability to take the action, and then you would provide the prompt or nudge to make it happen, like a link. And it's a simple email, but think about all of the research, choosing the recipient, remembering their circumstances, taking the time to evaluate the product fit, the creation, which is like writing the email, choosing the right words, including the right information, not too much, not too little, and then providing a path for them to act. That's kind of behavioral content design in a nutshell. And I feel like this example is one of the ways to feel like, yes, we can all do behavioral content design. Yes, it is worth thinking of it in these very specific terms. And yes, I think it can make an impact in the way that we use language. So another framework that we use a lot in our attempt to work early and often together is the notion of perceived value. And because we can't really design for the BMAP if there's no value there to begin with. The perceived value formula holds that the perceived value of an experience is equal to the experience's expected utility minus its expected interaction cost. So here's a real world example. Here's a souvenir shop packed to the gills. And what would you say the perceived value of this is? Think about it for a moment. And now what would you say the perceived value of this is, this museum shop? It's sparse, it's curated and clean. In this particular analogy, I think the expected utility of the souvenir shop and the museum shop is more or less equal. But the souvenir shop requires a higher interaction cost to find what you're looking for. This interaction cost results in a slightly lower perceived value, and the museum shop has a curated, sparse selection of items contributing to a higher perceived value. This doesn't apply everywhere across every experience, but I think it's a nice way to get this idea sort of crystallized. Here are two companies that sell the same products at two very different levels of perceived value. And I think the biggest difference in this moment is content. And I also say that because as you're looking at this slide, like, the text is very small. You're probably not able to read it very well. But I will point out that before we even read something, we're scanning the content. We establish a perceived value based on signals that tell us what the interaction cost versus expected utility might be. So even though we're not reading the text, we're already forming impressions about which one has a higher or lower perceived value. For me, Warby Parker has a slightly higher perceived value. And this moves nicely into the information foraging theory. I think that the notion of perceived value ties in directly with this theory, and it's that content is information, and people who use digital products spend a lot of time foraging for information. It's how they learn to use products, to build habits, and to share their experiences with others. And so this particular theory is helpful for me to think about I just lost my train of words. I don't remember the last 3 words that I just said, but that's okay. Let's just quickly revisit Glasses USA. Here's actually how it looked immediately upon landing. And I would ask, like, how well is this informational patch designed? And I would say that it's probably not very designed. It probably is not designed very intentionally. I imagine that someone did not think much about how all these elements would coalesce into a moment of low perceived value. And I think that's okay. Like things like this happen, and you can't always account for like different browser pop-ups and experiences that people will have. But it's just a very low perceived value at this moment, as soon as I'm landing on the page. Okay, so now that I've talked about some in-depth frameworks, I want to introduce you to 3 shortcuts to behavioral design that I found in my experience are guaranteed to work 100% of the time. The first is just try writing everything on a typewriter, or try writing some things on a typewriter. I feel like the clickety-clackety kind of tactile feel, it just makes everything that you write better, okay? Try it. The second is that you really only need to eat solid food after 9 p.m. Sometimes all of that sustenance can get in the way of thinking and getting content onto a page. And the third thing, and I'm not recommending that anyone actually do this because I'm not a doctor and because I don't have a lawyer, but have a hole drilled in the top of your skull to increase blood flow to your brain. This is like super helpful. And this is actually a Hieronymus Bosch painting depicting one of the very first product teams and their performing procedure on their content designer that they believed would give them the power of 10 content designers. And bonus points to you if you can tell which one of these people is a product manager and which one is the researcher. I know, I can tell. All of that to say, there's like my dad jokey way of saying that there's no shortcuts to behavioral content design. It takes time and patience and collaboration. And if you do try to take shortcuts, you end up potentially running the risk of using like a negative pattern. So it's really worth thinking about these things. And I spend a lot of time thinking about it. And even though I'm the one spending a lot of time thinking about it, this is like my obligatory moment to say that behavioral content design isn't something I do alone. And it's not something anyone should do on their own. It should be a broader process within a design team. And it takes a lot of cross-functional collaboration. I collaborate with the entire team, really. There's that thing again. Yes. I saw this little sticker emoji and I loved it so much that I've used it in 3 places in my presentation. So again, here's an example from ConvertKit. Don't want to put anyone on blast, but I thought this was a fun example that Scott Kuby shared on Twitter of an example of what can happen when you don't collaborate with your content designer on a growth or behavioral content opportunity. This is a cancellation flow. And so you decided to cancel a thing and it says, it wasn't all bad, right? Did we do anything well? And like the voice and tone here is cool. I like this in any other experience. But the overall content strategy is starting to maybe wear me thin a little bit because I have to select something that they did well before I can cancel, or I can say, never mind, I don't want to cancel. The next screen says, we want to make things easy for you. How about we pause your subscription for 3 moments? So I can pause it, or I say, no, I'd rather cancel. I say, no, I'd rather cancel. And it says, one last thing. How about 1 free month? So here I have to tell the system a 3rd time that I want to cancel just to get through this cancellation flow. And finally, you have this moment for Scott Kuby to voice his frustration. And I don't have any insight into how this particular flow was designed, but I can just say that I've been in teams where we've stumbled into an experience like this accidentally, and it can happen. And so it's worth thinking about these things about perceived value and information foraging, and even our old buddy BJ Fogg can help us avoid this type of pitfall. Let me do a time check on myself really quick. I think I'm doing pretty good. Yeah. One of the things that we do on my growth team at Chime is talk about how much text is in a particular interface. We do it all the time. And this is like one of the most cross-functional common grounds. We're like, a product manager might want to devote a lot more content to a feature or something than a designer would or than an engineer would. And we're always asking, like, is this too much text? Is this too little text? Is this just enough text? And it's hard because these conversations are just like, they just go back and forth. Eventually we say like, it looks about right. And the problem is that it's subjective. Like one person might like more text than the next, and one text heavy screen might make another screen seem light in comparison. So at Chime, we created a Figma plugin that helps measure the text volume on any frame that you have. Here's an early prototype of what that text volume measurement tool looks like. This wasn't actually a tool at this point. It was more of a framework. And I'll also mention now that this entire project was inspired by Jonathan Coleman's very, very, very excellent study of how much text apps use on their first screen. He did that study when he was at Intercom. And here's a look at what his methodology looked like for measuring text. It very much inspired my initial project. You can go to Figma, you can search for text volume, you can install the plugin right now and use it and check it out. But, not only was this project, the development of not only was developing this tool a cross-functional endeavor, but it also allowed us to facilitate like behavioral content design conversations with any stakeholder. All I have to do is share my screen, pull up a frame with some text in it, and pull up the plugin and show people exactly how much text is on the screen. It'll give you a percentage. And I think that really frames a lot of conversations in a much more action-oriented manner. If you can say, well, this screen has 15% text while the other one has 60% text, maybe we can have a middle ground. Or we can look at a series of screens that are already in the wild and see how they're performing, and maybe draw some conclusions about how the amount of text it might impact behavior. We're also using this tool to extend our knowledge of how text volume impacts behavior right now with our user research team. So I don't have a lot of insight into that, but I'd say get the tool and check it out. See if you can find some insights yourself. It's called Text Volume, and it's by Chime. I spoke about perceived value earlier. Just time checking myself one more time. And it's one thing I think to focus on this type of concept or framework as an independent contributor, content designer. But when we're leading a team or facilitating like a design critique, and generally just trying to be a good designer and content designer, I think it's important to make sure that everyone agrees on this level of perceived value, or at least there's some consensus about how it's achieved. And one of the workshops that I do on a regular basis is called the elevator chat. And I think it is one of those things that really helps me understand all of the different perspectives on a team cross-functionally in terms of understanding how people think about the story of an experience, about the types of terminology people on the team are using, and maybe what some of the key moments are that could be brought into like a narrative arc, for instance. This is the material that I share with the group during the workshop. It's pretty simple: a scenario, some required info that we want to communicate, and some goals. And then I have each participant sort of write out a conversational script. The idea is to get them thinking conversationally in a way that, one, clarifies language, two, anticipates a user's questions, and also anticipates their state of mind. This can help me understand both, really what we want to be communicating to the user, but also areas where my team might need cross-functional alignment in terms of communication. As many of you know, writers and people who are good with language often spend a lot of time clarifying between different people. Like I might help an engineer clarify what they mean to a designer, or et cetera. Afterwards, when you synthesize some of the information, you would come out with these deliverables. There's a narrative arc that specifies some narrative moments, and then a core narrative, which can be really helpful for designing things like an onboarding flow, which is what we did at Atlassian when creating this quick start experience, which we have on Confluence and Jira now. Okay, back to this thing, the hotel search. Put on your employee of Utah hats. What do you think you would change to increase engagement? Many of you might know the answer to this already, because the example that I based this exercise on is somewhat old. But what if I told you that changing book a room to check availability could contribute to a 17% increase in engagement? If you didn't believe me, I would cite an experiment that Google did. This was back in 2017. And 17% increase in engagement. And I think we can ask ourselves, like, how did such a small change result in such a significant lift? We can work backwards now that we've talked about behavioral content design a little bit, and we can say that, let's think about perceived value and behavior equals motivation, ability, prompt. We can hypothesize that the phrase book a room holds a higher expected interaction cost because it requires more commitment than check availability. And this heightened interaction cost will drive down motivation, thereby reducing the likelihood that people will successfully be prompted to complete the target behavior. And that is like the type of consideration that behavioral content designers or people with that mindset on will look for when identifying opportunities to think of. That kind of wraps up everything I want to share with you in this little package. And I want to close out by playing this video of a man blowing bubbles into other bubbles and then blowing cigarette smoke into his bubbles inside of bubbles. I come back to this video all the time. I don't know why, but he's mesmerizing. Anyways, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. If you go to gojace.it, you can find this presentation, some links to some of these frameworks, stuff like that. It was an honor speaking to you all. I think we're pretty much up at the end of the presentation. If I notice any questions here, I'll try to find a way to route some answers back to you. Thank you all so much.